In 2006, the St. Louis Cardinals became the worst World Series champions going by record after finishing 83-78. With a team of multiple future Hall of Famers, they were far from consistent and got hot at the right time. So let's see how they got to the top and if they really are the worst World Series champions.
Totally sports-esque. Major League.
Going into 2006, the excitement for the upcoming season for Cardinals fans didn't come from the team, but rather the new stadium. Planning for a new ballpark in downtown St. Louis began in 1995, and after receiving funding for a stadium that would cost $365 million and also be named Busch Stadium, construction began in 2004. And it was in 2004 when the Cardinals fielded one of their best teams in history, winning 105 games, their most since 1944, with Albert Pujols, Jim Edmonds, and Scott Rolen finishing in the top 5 of MVP voting, as they had the best team average and OPS in the National League. They would win the Central by 13 games and beat the Dodgers in the NLDS. Then after Jim Edmonds' walk-off home run in Game 6, they won the pennant in 7 games. But they ran into the Red Sox, who were destined to win after their 3-0 comeback. And they came back the next year with a team that was more complete, as they had the lowest team ERA, as Chris Carpenter won the Cy Young, and Albert Pujols won his first MVP, as they won 100 games to win the Central, as they beat the Padres in the NLDS, but they would lose to the Astros in the NLCS, somewhat forgotten after Pujols' mammoth home run in Game 5. And going into 2006, a lot of pieces from these two 100-to-win teams would be gone. Matt Morris, Mark Grudzielanek, Reggie Sanders, and Julian Taveras left in free agency, while Ray King was traded for Aaron Miles, and Hall of Famer Larry Walker would retire in the offseason. And the pieces they added were Juan Encarnacion, Sidney Ponson, Braden Looper, and Ricardo Renson. So there was no telling where they would end up, but it appeared they weren't as talented as they had been in previous years, competing in a division with the defending National League champions. But in the first month of the season, in Busch Stadium 3, it looked like they had lost a step. They won their first game in Philly, as Albert Pujols homered twice, and Scott Rolen, who missed much of 2005, hit a grand slam. They played the first game in the new Busch Stadium at 3-3, and they would beat the Brewers with another Pujols home run. 6 days later, Pujols would have his second career 3-home run game, as he hit 14 home runs in April, as the Cardinals were tied for first at 17-8. And they would continue in May. Pujols had an additional 11 home runs, as the Cardinals finished the month with a record of 34-19, as they were up 5 games in the division, with the best record in the National League. But May also brought a string of injuries that would be a consistent problem. Ricardo Renson had season-ending shoulder surgery on May 12th, Sidney Ponson went on the DL with a strained muscle in his right arm, the reigning Cy Young winner went on the DL with bursitis, while Jim Edmonds missed some time with an infection, as the flu made its way into the clubhouse. And worst of all for the team, for the first time in his career, Albert Pujols would go on the DL on June 4th after straining his right oblique. And these injuries took a toll. As Pujols was on the DL, they were 5.5 games. And then interleague play came along. Going up against AL Central teams, they would lose 10 out of 12, including the first 8, as they went 9-16 in June. And you can pretty much tell the story of this team in this time period, as despite their poor play, they were still leading the division ahead of the surprising Reds, while the Astros, Cubs, and Pirates were all below 500. And if there's one word to describe the team, then it's inconsistent. As they sent 4 players to the All-Star game, who had all previously played in one, the front office was forced to make some moves to deal with injuries. They traded for Jeff Weaver, Ronnie Belliard, and Jorge Sosa by the end of July. Bigger moves than would later be expected, and rookie Chris Duncan would start to get more playing time and make a difference as the Cardinals went on a 7-game winning streak in the middle of July, winning 13 of 16 in that stretch to regain their 5.5-game lead, while again going 16 games over 500. And the inconsistent part can be found right here, as just after that great stretch, they went on their second 8-game losing streak of the year for a month that was similar to June. Where this team really struggled was pitching. Mark Mulder came back from the DL at the end of August and got hit hard, leading him to return to the DL for the rest of the season. Jason Marquis made history, as for the first time since Chubby Dean in 1940, a pitcher gave up 12 runs in a start twice in a season, that being him. New acquisition Jeff Weaver was not good, posting a near 6 ERA in his first 2 months, while closer Jason Isringhausen blew 2 saves in the month with a 5 ERA, as he was dealing with a hip problem that put him on the DL as rookie Adam Wainwright became the closer. Jim Edmonds and David Eckstein also missed some time on the DL, as it was an up-and-down month that saw the good team show at the end of the month, as they were 13-15, still 10 games over 500, and 5 games ahead of the Reds. And on September 3rd, as Albert Pujols had his second 3-home run game of the season, they won their 73rd game, and despite still dealing with injuries, slumps, and some poor pitching, on September 19th, they won their 80th game, and they were up 7 games. So they could just assume they were going to easily win the division, and while home field advantage in the NL was gone because of how good the Mets were, they could still get home field advantage for the NLDS. But then, the bad Cardinals decided to show up. For the 3rd time that year, they went on a 7-game losing streak after the 19th, and important was that 4 of these games were against the Astros, who were surging after finally putting things together. And after they lost that 7th game, they were just 1.5 games up, and after ending the streak the next day, then losing the next day, it was at just half a game, as the Astros won their 9th straight game. So now they were on the verge of one of the worst collapses in baseball history, and the reason for that is they seemed tired. Jim Edmonds and David Eckstein missed nearly the entire month, while almost half their lineup hit under .240 in September. It was really Albert Pujols and Scott Spiezio who were carrying the team. Cardinals would win the next night, as the Astros' winning streak came to an end. The Scott Spiezio's bases-loaded triple would help them win the next night, and now they needed to win just one more game, or the Astros had to lose one more game in order to win the division. And they got one of those things on October 1st, when they lost, but the Astros also lost. Because of that, they did not play a scheduled makeup game against the Giants the next day, and that's the reason they played 161 games instead of 162. And they would limp into the playoffs with an 83-78 record, the second worst ever for a division winner. And if you noticed a pattern with this team, then it was a good thing they decided to play bad at the end of September. And funny enough, the team they were facing in the NLDS were the worst division winners ever the previous year, as in 2005, the Padres won the NL West with a record of 82-80. And that rough ending for the Cardinals was the reason the Padres got home field advantage. And that was also the reason no one expected them to do anything in the postseason. And for the 2nd straight year, it was Jake Peavy versus Chris Carpenter in Game 1. And it was a pitching duel until the 4th, when Albert Pujols would hit a 2-run home run, and Juan Encarnacion would later hit a sac fly. And that was all Chris Carpenter needed, as he gave just 1 over 6 1/3, and the Cardinals bullpen, which hadn't been great all year, especially down the stretch, would close things out as the Cardinals took Game 1. And in order for a team like the 2006 Cardinals to win the World Series, players had to get hot at the right time. And that was the case for Jeff Weaver, who posted a 5.18 ERA with the Cardinals that year, but turned into his brother in 2011 in the playoffs. As in Game 2, he threw 5 shutout innings, as the Cardinals bullpen shut out the Padres to win 2-0 to match their series lead, as Adam Wainwright got his first postseason save. And going into Game 3, the Padres had lost 8 straight playoff games to the Cardinals, but that losing streak ended in Game 3, as future Rangers GM Chris Young shut the Cardinals down as they lost 3-1. And in Game 4, future and former White Sox manager Tony La Russa decided to start Chris Carpenter on short rest, hoping to close things out at home, and it didn't look good when he gave up 2 in the first. But the Cardinals responded with 2, which kept things tied until the 6th, when the Cardinals scored 4 runs thanks to singles, walks, and errors. Chris Carpenter would be pulled in the 8th, giving up just 2 as Adam Wainwright closed the series out to give the Cardinals their 3rd straight NLCS appearance. What was really the story in the series is the Padres' inability to score with runners on. They won a combined 2 for 32 with runners in scoring position in the series. Even in the game they won, they left 14 runners on. But it's also a credit to the Cardinals' pitching staff that was starting to find themselves after posting a 4.54 ERA in the regular season that was worse than the Pirates, who won 67 games. And while a Cardinals series win in the NLDS was a possibility, given the fact that they went 23-11 against NL West teams that year, no one was giving them a chance in the NLCS. By far and away the best team in the National League was the Mets. A team with 4 all-star starters, they won 97 games in a year where the second best NL team won 88, that being the Padres and the Dodgers. The Mets were at the disadvantage of losing Orlando Hernandez and Pedro Martinez to injury, but they were still clearly the better team, having already swept the Dodgers in 3 games. And while they were missing a first-ballot Hall of Famer, they had another edge for Game 1 in Tom Glavine, and he pitched great, shutting out the Cardinals over 7 innings. And Jeff Weaver also pitched great, giving up the only runs of the game in the 6th with a 2-run home run by Carlos Beltran, who had absolutely destroyed the Cardinals in the NLCS while in the Astros in 2004. The Mets won 2-0, and afterwards, Albert Pujols said he was not impressed by what he saw from Tom Glavine, saying, "I say it wasn't good at all. We just didn't get some opportunities, and that's it." He did the same thing that he always does. Throw a changeup, fastball, and that was it. The comments led to criticism from fans, the media, and even Tony La Russa, who said Glavine deserved credit. But while Billy Wagner adamantly defended Glavine, Glavine simply said everyone was entitled to their opinion. Either way, they moved on to Game 2, and Carlos Delgado said he wasn't impressed by Chris Carpenter when he had a 3-run home run off him in the first. But the Cardinals responded with 2 of their own, and 2 in the next inning, which tied things at 4. And in the 5th, Carlos Delgado continued to say how unimpressed he was with another home run, this one being a solo home run. The Mets added another in the 6th before Scott Spiezio tied things with a triple in the 7th, as things were tied at 6 in the 9th. And in the 9th, Billy Wagner came in looking to hold things down. While Wagner should be in the Hall of Fame, he wasn't as great in the postseason. The Cardinals countered the lefty with the right-handed hitting So Taguchi, and that paid off when he hit the 9th pitch of the at-bat over the fence to put them up by 1. The Cardinals would tack on 2 more as they won Game 2 9-6. In Game 3 again was a case of a Cardinal pitcher stepping up. Jeff Suppan had an average year by his standards with a 4.12 ERA, and Game 3 was the Jeff Suppan game. After a 2-run first, Suppan made it 3-0 by hitting a solo home run, and that would be all he needed as he threw 8 shutout innings as the Cardinals won 5-0. And after the Mets didn't score in the first 2 innings of Game 4, they hadn't scored in 14 innings, but they came back to life in the 3rd, when Carlos Beltran and David Wright hit home runs to go up 2-1. The Cardinals tied things in the bottom half, but 2 innings later, Carlos Delgado continued to be unimpressed by Cardinal pitching with his 3rd home run of the series, this being a 3-run home run. And the Mets would never lose the lead again in this high-scoring game that saw them win 12-5, with Carlos Beltran hitting 2 of the 7 total home runs hit in this game by both teams. So Game 5 was huge, and it was a rematch of Game 1 as Jeff Weaver and Tom Glavine were on the mound. And as expected with these 2 pitchers who totally had similar careers, things were a pitching duel to start. It was scoreless until the 4th, when Jose Valentin hit a 2-run double. Then in the bottom half, Pujols would back up his past statement by hitting a solo home run off Tom Glavine. Then a rally that ended with a Ronnie Belliard single would tie things. And 1 inning later, the Cardinals took the lead with a David Eckstein single, and Chris Duncan would hit a solo home run in the 6th, as Jeff Weaver would best Tom Glavine, and now the 83-win Cardinals were 1 win away from the World Series. And Game 6 gave the same score as Game 5. Jose Reyes became the first Met since Lenny Dykstra in 1986 to lead off a postseason game with a home run. And with the season on the line, John Mayne kept the Cardinals scoreless to 5 1/3, despite walking 4 and giving up 2 hits. He would be pulled in the 6th, and 1 inning later the Mets added 2, which was important when Billy Wagner gave up 2 runs in the top of the 9th, as the Mets won 4-2 to set up a Game 7. The Game 7 gave Mets fans a great memory, along with terrible memories. Oliver Perez faced off against Game 3 hero Jeff Suppan, and the Mets finally scored off him with a David Wright RBI single in the 1st. But the Cardinals tied things in the 2nd with a squeeze play. Both Perez and Suppan were escaping trouble to keep things at 1, and Perez would get in trouble again in the 6th when Jim Edmonds got on with 1 out. And there came the great memory. Scott Rolen hit a drive to left. It looked to be gone, with Jim Edmonds so confident that he rounded 2nd. But then, Endy Chavez made one of the greatest defensive plays of all time by leaping up over the fence to snow cone the ball that was clearly over the fence. He then set himself and threw out Jim Edmonds at first, who went all out on that not being caught. Chavez would go on to receive 2 curtain calls as the Mets loaded the bases in the 6th as momentum looked to carry over. But Suppan got Valentin, then Endy Chavez out to send things to the 7th, still tied. Things remained 1-1 going to the 9th, then Jim Edmonds struck out, then Scott Rolen would hit a single off Aaron Hellman. Then up came Yadier Molina. Molina will always be known more for his defensive ability than his offense, and though he was better offensively later, in the beginning of his career, it was his defense that was the absolute reason he was in the majors. That year he had .216 with 6 home runs, 2 less than he had in his first full season in 2005. So things still look good with the bottom of the order up. That is until Hyman threw the pitch, and Molina would drive it to left, right where the Chavez play was earlier. But this time, Chavez had no chance of getting it, as the Cardinals now led 3-1, with Molina's home run adding 41% to the Cardinals' win probability. That was now at 91%. Hellman got the last 2, and in came rookie Adam Wainwright, who suddenly became the closer a month ago, and he got himself in immediate trouble when Jose Valentin and Endy Chavez led off with singles. Wainwright was able to calm down and got a huge strikeout of pinch hitter Cliff Floyd, and followed that by getting Jose Reyes to line out, leaving things up to Paulo Duca, and Wainwright would proceed to walk him. And up to the plate came the last player the Cardinals wanted to see, in Carlos Beltran. He had .417 with 4 home runs against the Cardinals in the 2004 NLCS, and he had already hit 3 this year, as he was already cementing himself as one of the best postseason players of all time. The odds were still in the Cardinals' favor, and they went further that way after Beltran fell down 0-2. And with everyone in Shea Stadium holding their breath, Wainwright delivered the pitch of his life, striking out Beltran on a perfect curveball on the outside corner. And with shock running through Shea, the Cardinals somehow won their 2nd pennant in 3 years. Easily the least talented team they had in those 3 years beat the heavily favored Mets, which made the loss so painful for them. While Endy Chavez is immortalized in Mets history, they also have to show the final image of Beltran striking out to remember why his catch isn't even more legendary. With a dominant Mets team that looked to have a possible dynasty in the making, that game would end up being the last postseason game at Shea, after 2 late-season collapses. And while Mets fans see it as even more devastating that they couldn't beat an 83-win team, any Mets fan that knows their history should know that it's hard for them to complain when only one pennant-winning team in history had a worse record than the Cardinals, that being the 1973 Mets. In what was Willie Mays' final season, the Mets won the NL East despite winning just 82 games. And in this time, there was no NLDS, so they faced the 99-win Reds in the NLCS and proceeded to beat them in 5 games. They would face the 94-win A's in the World Series, and they would lose in 7 games. And now, the second worst pennant-winning team was facing a 95-win Detroit Tigers team who just beat the A's with a Maglio Ordonez walk-off home run in Game 4. What these two teams had in common was they beat a New York team to get there, as the Tigers beat the Yankees before beating the A's. Just 3 years away from losing 119 games, the Tigers were hot going into the World Series. And as they know better than anyone, the last thing a team that's on a roll in baseball wants is to stop. And well, as the Cardinals went 7 games with the Mets, that's what they got. There was a week gap between Game 4 of the ALCS and Game 1 of the World Series. And despite this, the Tigers were still huge favorites going into the series, and for good reason. They eased their way to the NLDS and ALCS, and though they weren't the most talented team in the American League, they were more talented than the Cardinals, and it showed when they swept the Cardinals in Comerica Park in June that year. This all prompted Bob Nightingale to say the Tigers would win in 3, and when has Bob Nightingale ever been wrong about anything? Tigers also had home field advantage, as in this time the winner of the All-Star game got home field advantage, and Michael Young's go-ahead triple in that game is the reason Game 1 was in Detroit. With both managers looking to join Sparky Anderson as the only manager to win the World Series in both leagues, and both teams looking to break 20-plus year World Series droughts, for the first time in World Series history, 2 rookies were on the mound in Game 1. A matchup that would end up looking like Weaver vs. Glavine. It was Anthony Reyes versus Justin Verlander. And the Tigers got to Reyes first, while Carlos Guillen singled in a run. But in the second, Scott Rolen hit a game-tying solo home run that broke the 0 for 15 mark Rolen had in the World Series to that point, which was a record. And 1 inning later was when the Cardinals really got to Verlander. Chris Duncan hit an RBI double, then after deciding to pitch to Albert Pujols instead of walking him, Pujols made him pay by hitting a 2-run home run, and the other rookie in Reyes cruised. From the 1st to the 6th, he retired 17 straight batters, a World Series record for a rookie. And the week off started to show itself in this game, as the Tigers made 3 errors as they lost 7-2, ending an 8-game losing streak for National League teams in the World Series. While the story of Game 1 was the 2 rookie pitchers, 42-year-old Kenny Rogers was the story of Game 2. After controversy surrounding a substance on his hand that he said was dirt and rosin, Rogers washed his hand after the first inning and went on to throw 8 shutout innings, which gave him 23 straight shutout playoff innings, as Craig Monroe became the 4th to ever homer in his first 2 World Series games, as the Tigers won 3-1. And as the Cardinals became the second team after the 1970 Cincinnati Reds to host the World Series in their first year in a new park, Chris Carpenter was making his World Series debut, and he pitched nearly an identical game to Rogers, pitching 8 innings, striking out 6, and giving up 0, throwing 82 pitches along the way. Meanwhile, those errors killed the Tigers again, with the Cardinals up 2-0 in the 7th. Guitar Hero legend Joe Zumaya overthrew Brandon Inge on a potential force-out, which brought in 2 runs, as the Cardinals will go on to win 5-0. Game 4 was delayed a day due to rain, and on the mound was the NLCS MVP and Jeff Suppan, going against Jeremy Bonderman, and the Tigers took a 3-0 lead in the 3rd after a Pudge Rodriguez single, but the Cardinals responded with a David Eckstein RBI double and a Yadier Molina RBI double to make things 3-2, which was the score until the 7th. The rain came back to be a big deal when Curtis Granderson slipped on the outfield grass on a David Eckstein double, and he would score on a sac bunt that saw Fernando Rodney overthrow Placido Polanco at first, and Preston Wilson would later drive in the go-ahead run with a single. However, the Tigers weren't done, as Brandon Inge would double home the tying run in the 8th, but again the defense would make a difference, as in the bottom half, David Eckstein hit a double that tipped off Craig Monroe's glove, who had been playing shallow. Adam Wainwright would end up getting the win, along with a blown save. And now the Cardinals were 1 win away. The last time these two played in the World Series, the Tigers managed to come back from a 3-1 deficit, and now they were looking to do so again. But standing in their way was the mighty Jeff Weaver, and standing in his way was Justin Verlander, who escaped a rough first inning after walking the 3. But he wouldn't survive a scoreless second when David Eckstein hit an infield single that Brandon Inge made a nice play on, but he threw it away for the 7th Detroit error of the series. And after an error by the Cardinals in the 3rd, Sean Casey hit a go-ahead 2-run home run. But the lead didn't last long. Yadier Molina and So Taguchi hit singles, then Jeff Weaver came up and bunted right to Verlander, who picked the ball up to try to throw out known speedster Yadier Molina, and he would end up throwing it away, allowing Molina to score, this being the Tigers' 8th error. And what's crazy is this was the 5th error by a Tigers pitcher, a World Series record. David Eckstein would drive in a run on a groundout, and they wouldn't lose the lead again. Jeff Weaver would go on to throw 8 innings, giving up 2 with just 1 of those earned, as Adam Wainwright would strike out Brandon Ninge, who was the winning run, to officially make the Cardinals the worst team to ever win the World Series. And with this, the question is, were they really the worst World Series champions? Well, no matter what, by record they are the worst, and they are one of 5 teams to win the World Series after winning less than 90 games in a full 162-game season. And remarkably, all but the 2014 Giants won their division, taking advantage of bad divisions, then going on an October run. And in looking at a few team stats, it's clear that the battle for the worst World Series winner is between the 2006 Cardinals and the 1987 Twins. We can first look at the home-away splits. Of these 5 teams, it's the 87 Twins and the 06 Cardinals with the best home record, but that naturally means they had the worst road records, and especially in the Twins' case, their away record is shocking. If you are told that there was a team that won just 29 of their 81 road games, you would just assume that team didn't make the playoffs, but not the 87 Twins, who won the AL West in a time where there were just 2 divisions. And while the 06 Cardinals were still bad on the road, a notable difference is the Cardinals had a run difference in those road games of -32. In the 87 Twins road games, there was a run difference of -83, and that goes into the next stat, which is total run differential. The 87 Twins are the only team that had a negative run differential and won the World Series, meaning they scored a total of 786 runs and gave up 806 runs. And that's a factor when looking at the Pythagorean win-loss record for these teams. That formula, which was devised by Bill James, looks at how many games a team should have won looking at run differential using this simple formula. And when we look at that, the Twins actually should have been 4 games under 500, while the rest of these 5 teams stay relatively similar, except the 21 Braves who should have won 6 more. So the 87 Twins made absolutely no sense. Not only should they not have won the World Series, they shouldn't have even been in the playoffs, backed up by the fact that they would have finished 5th in the AL East. But again, that's the case with all these teams who benefit from expanded playoffs. But in terms of talent level, something to look at is the wins above average totals of these teams. And again, the Twins further make no sense, as while every team here was in the positives, barely in the Cardinal sense, the Twins had a negative 2.2 wins above average. For reference, that was 19th in the league, at a time when there was just 26 teams. And in just looking at the 06 Cardinals and 87 Twins, a similarity they have in their lineup is that it was full of players who had pretty good years, a lot of below average ones, and one outlier, that being Kirby Puck in 1987, who finished 3rd in MVP voting, and Albert Pujols in 2006, who finished 2nd in MVP voting. An award that you can make a great case for Pujols, considering his WAR, and the fact that without Pujols, the Cardinals would probably finish well below 500. And the same can be said in the starting pitching staffs of these teams. There's really one bright spot in both teams' rotation. In 87, it was Frank Viola, while in 2006, it was Chris Carpenter. But pitchers and players on both teams stepped up when it mattered. For the Twins, players like Gary Gaetti, Steve Lombardozzi, and Bert Blyleven stepped up, while the Cardinals had David Eckstein, Jeff Suppan, and Jeff Weaver. And in deciding which of these teams was worse, even though the Twins barely had a better record, overall, they were worse than the 2006 Cardinals. Along with the previous stats mentioned, they didn't have to deal with the same number of injuries as the Cardinals, and they never showed signs of being a dominant team like the Cardinals in 2006 showed in flashes. The 2006 Cardinals looked worse because of those bad stretches, but they showed what they were capable of when the team was fully healthy in October, and something else the Cardinals had was experience. While they lost pieces in the offseason, there was still plenty there from the dominant 04 and 05 teams, including a prime Albert Pujols and Chris Carpenter. And the experience made a difference, which makes the Twins make even less sense, considering 1987 was their first playoff appearance in 27 years. And funny enough, the team they ended up beating that year was the Cardinals. And that really shows how baseball is. It doesn't matter how it happens, as long as a team gets in the playoffs, they can get on a roll and end up on top despite having a just above average season. And we'll probably see that more often in the future, considering it just happened last year. 2023 was the second time 2 teams with exactly 90 wins or less were in the World Series, the other being in 2014. And in these 2 instances, it was 2 wildcard teams playing each other. The difference being in 2023, the Diamondbacks with their 84 wins wouldn't have made the playoffs in 2014. So the more teams get in, the more chaos can happen, even if there's plenty who don't like it. And in the future, we could have a team with less than 80 wins win the World Series, just like the Dodgers in 2020, who won it all with just 43 wins. Hopefully you like this video, and if so, please consider liking and subscribing for new videos every week. Thank you.